I'm Nick Redding, President and CEO of Preservation Maryland, and I am joined by Elly Cowan, who is our Director of Advocacy. And it's always fun for us to have the opportunity to update our members, supporters, friends, colleagues, legislators about what happened over the course of the 90-day sprint of the General Assembly, one of the strangest General Assemblies probably in Maryland history, with no lobbyists on hand, no advocates in the room, a really interesting session. But I also have to say, perhaps one of the best sessions in recent memory for historic preservation, in no small measure as a result of the work of obviously Preservation Maryland, but all of our colleagues and friends, and a bevy of different legislators who have become our best friends and supporters over the years as we've worked to put preservation at the center of important conversations. Because as we often say, it's not just about saving old buildings, it's about reusing those buildings to build vibrant, sustainable, equitable, just communities. And so this has been a great year for that. And fortunately, we have Elly on hand, who lived and breathed this, to talk to us about all the details associated with it. And for those joining who aren't familiar with Preservation Maryland, just real briefly, we are the statewide historic preservation organization. We were formed back in 1931, so this is our 90th anniversary. And in addition to proactive legislative advocacy, we run a host of different programs. We have grant programs, give out about $150,000 a year in grants. We provide education and outreach. We have a weekly podcast called PreserveCast. We have an online conference currently, but used to be in person, of course. We have a historic property redevelopment program where we were saving and restoring and rehabilitating historic structures. And we currently are doing one of those on Jonathan Street in Hagerstown, Maryland. And we also have a partnership with the National Park Service, which is a workforce development program. And then in addition to all of that, we also have a program that Elly also oversees called Smart Growth Maryland, which is focused on the intersection between historic preservation and smart land use policy. So we touch pretty much every different piece of preservation, from advocacy to smart growth to the trades themselves, to providing the money to make it all happen. And speaking of money to make it all happen, historic tax credits are a huge part of our portfolio. And they're something that we're always focused on. Elly has been preaching the gospel of
it's true to anyone who will listen.
Yes, sermon on the Annapolis Mount. She provides a lot of background on all of this. So you've got good news to share on pretty much every tax credit program when it comes to historic tax credits. So talk to us about the different programs and what we've accomplished this year.
Great. Yeah. So the Maryland has a state historic tax credit that is made up of 3 different programs. There's the large competitive commercial credit, which is for your large scale projects, rehabilitation projects like, American Brewery, or Phillips packing plant down on the shore. There's also the small commercial credit, which focuses on your more modest scale, Main Street type rehabilitation projects. And then there's also the residential. So if you own a historic resident house in Maryland, and want to do some work on it, you qualify for a historic tax credit. And so all three of those programs work together to create, the statewide historic tax credit. And this year, like Nick said, we were able to make positive changes on all 3 of those programs. If you've been following Preservation Maryland at all this year, you know that our priority preservation bill was, it dealt with the small commercial credit. And when that program was created, it started with an initial funding authorization of $4 million to sort of get the program up off its feet, get it going. And so that meant that the Maryland Historical Trust, who does a phenomenal job of administering all three of those programs, in addition to all the other work that they do for historic preservation in Maryland, that they could give out up to $4 million in small commercial type tax credits. And so the tax credit is a 20% credit of qualified rehabilitation expenditures on a project. The developer, submits an application, it's okay, they do the work, and then the tax credit can get certified once it's established that the historic preservation work was accomplished. In the past couple of years, Preservation Maryland and our supporters have worked on legislation that has really improved that program policy-wise. So we were able to open that credit up for residential development projects. So you could take on a row house or a block of row houses that you wanted to rehabilitate and that as a development project, and then sell to owners. And one of the great projects that's a great example of there's a lot of those all across Baltimore City, but also in Frederick and really all over Maryland. And because of the policy changes that we were able to make, the program became very popular. So popular, in fact, that it ran out of money. So in 2020, unfortunately, there was we reached that $4 million threshold and there were no more credits to be given out. And that was just not acceptable. We can't let such a successful program be a victim of its own success. So we were able to work with Delegate Stephanie Smith from Baltimore City and Senator Guy Gazzone from Howard County on cross-filed legislation that would increase the authorized amount for that credit by $1 million. And going into this session, we knew we were facing an uphill battle with any piece of legislation that had any funding associated with it. And so while the real need for this program is infinitely greater than $1 million, we thought $1 million was attained, a reasonable ask. And after a lot of work and negotiating and advocating from all of our supporters and colleagues, we were able to get that bill across the finish line. And so pending the governor's signature, that program will continue to exist, which is really what we were fighting for. We were fighting for the life of that program. And so, while our work is not done, that $1 million is probably going to go pretty fast, which is great. It shows how necessary those credits are. We will keep working, but it was a big victory for us. And you're on mute, Nick.
Sam. Yeah. It's also, I was going to say, it's also a program that, the large commercial, which you're going to talk about, obviously has potential to impact every community across the state, but the small commercial has even more tremendous applicability because, there may not be a large commercial project in Myersville, Maryland. The scale is very different. And this program allows investment in historic places in pretty much every community across the state. There is some type of structure that could benefit from this. Not to say that the large commercial doesn't have that applicability as well, but it works better oftentimes in larger urban or urbanized areas just because of the scale of the projects. But every little town from Pocomoke City to Walkersville has a historic place that could benefit from this. So it really is exciting to see this happen.
Yeah, and as time marches forward, more structures become eligible because more buildings become historic. So even people who live in, the DC metro area. Oh, well, we don't really have historic, buildings there. It's like, well, actually, all of the mid-century office buildings are starting to come online.
Right.
All of the, suburbs, post-war suburbs, are considered historic now,
right.
too.
Well,
And
because 50 years was
yep.
1971.
Yes, it sure is.
It sure is. So, so if you were born in 71 or earlier, you are eligible for the
You're
national.
historic.
You're
Good for you.
True. We'll advocate for you.
Right.
So let's talk about the large commercial, which we have been singing the praises of this program for a long time. Talk to us about this and
yes.
our angel in the General Assemblies who helped pull this together.
So the large commercial credit, I think probably if you have been a follower of Preservation Maryland, you've heard us praising this program almost ad nauseum for at least the last 7 years that Nick and I have been at the organization. It is a program that incentivizes the rehabilitation of large-scale historic structures, and there have been studies done on the program that show that there is an 8-to-1 return on investment to the state for the credit. So for every dollar that the state invests in these large commercial historic tax credits, there is an expected $8.14 return in economic activity generated. So it's not a handout. And I think the name tax credit sort of can give the sense that this is just, something that the state's giving to developers. And it really isn't. It's an investment, and it's an incentive to draw private dollars, into these projects to take on these, really catalytic keystone projects in neighborhoods that really have not seen that investment in order to get that project moving. And we've seen that, property values of properties, of structures in the vicinity of historic tax credit projects go up. Other investors see, a project like Phillips packing plant happening and say, oh, hey, something's happening in this neighborhood. Maybe we should get involved as well.
I just wanted to interject too, is that it's as you probably were going to say, but it's exciting for me, is that, there's a lot of conversation around the issue of affordable housing.
Yes.
And so many historic tax credit projects overlap with the low-income housing tax credit. It can be mixed use, mixed income. And the other great thing about it too, as we know, we have championed, is that historic rehabs are closer to jobs. And so affordable housing, can be sometimes a misnomer, in that if you build it at the edges of communities and then people have to drive really far to get to their job, that sort of negates the affordability issue. And so the accessibility and accessible housing that historic rehabs provide is a critical component. So no matter which way you slice it and what you care about, this program is making a big difference all across Maryland.
And that brings up the good point too, that, projects in communities that have not faced underrepresentation and things like that, and historic disinvestment, those projects will happen. These incentives really help bring in investment into communities that have traditionally not, have been disinvested. And so we're seeing that a lot not only in Baltimore City, where, a number of these projects are happening, but really all across the state, where these large commercial tax credits are happening. And so The large commercial credit program is funded annually through the budget, which means that the governor of Maryland puts in a certain amount into the into the Department of Planning's capital budget for these credits. For the last 6 years, that number has been $9 million for the entire state. Now, keep in mind, these are multi-million-dollar projects. There's a $3 million cap on the credits per project. So ostensibly, only 3 projects per year for the whole state could move forward. And to give you a little bit of context, our neighbors to the south in Virginia, do not have a capped program, and they do about $100 million in these credits every year. West Virginia, they're doing 30 million. So we're not even a third of the way towards West Virginia's investment in these projects. And then, you know, in states with similar budget sizes, like Wisconsin and Massachusetts, they're doing about 50 million. So really, I mean, we're talking starvation level funding here in Maryland. In a state that has, you know, just as important a history and historic building stock as Massachusetts, you know, I would say. We have been beating the drum incessantly to try and raise the funding for this. And I'm happy to report this year, thanks to a bill that was sponsored by Senator Katie Fry Hester, who has been a friend of the organization and has sponsored historic tax credit legislation of ours in the past. We were able to work with sort of in committee on the House side to mandate a $3 million increase to $12 million for fiscal year 2023 and 2024. And now that may not seem like a whole lot of money, but considering we've been trying to push the needle forward for 6 years, this is a pretty big deal. And we are so grateful to Senator Hester for bringing the legislation, which actually creates a whole separate tax credit for catalytic revitalization projects of formerly state or federally owned government complexes, which is phenomenal, because then that's even more money going to these large historic projects. But we also owe our thanks to Delegate Eric Lukey, who's the chair of the Revenue Subcommittee on the House Ways and Means Committee, and he has been a supporter of tax credit, historic tax credit in the past, and so he was integral in helping us get that $12 million mandate for 2023 and 2024. And just to remind everybody, Maryland works on a fiscal year, so technically 2022 starts July 1, so we don't have to wait that long to see that. So, and again, much like with the small commercial, it may not be a lot, but anytime we can move the needle up, it's a victory for us, and we won't stop fighting. But I think it's important to celebrate, and we do have on our website, and maybe we can put it in the chat here, a link to thank your legislators for passing this legislation. And so both pending the governor's signature, both the small commercial and the large commercial will see a funding increase for the first time in 5 years, 6 years.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
And we've had support in leadership from the Speaker's office to the Senate President's office, leadership, obviously, of the Appropriations Committee of the House, the Budget and Tax Committee. So you name it, from Delegate McIntosh to Senator Gazzone to Delegate Lukey, and I have to say, Delegate Lukey, we've we've been talking and toying with the idea of having like a history caucus, and I think he would make a potentially a good chair for that. He's been going on
Got the soft pitch.
Yeah, exactly. So if he's tuning in, or
get at us, Delegate
we'll
Lukey.
let him know. But yeah, he's been traipsing across all of our state parks and is a big champion of the state parks. And did you want to talk about the residential piece too?
Speaking of state parks, thanks for the softball. The third program of the tax credit is the residential credit, and Maryland has this the Department of Natural Resources has this very cool program called the Resident Curatorship Program, which allows people to live in historic structures in state parks with a long-term lease, and the arrangement is that in exchange for living in these structures, those resident curators will take on the expense of rehabilitating the historic structures. And DNR owns more historic structures than any one property owner in the state. So this is a great way. We've heard so much about P3s, public-private partnerships. Here you go. This is a great one. But just because of a little loophole in policy, those resident curators were unable to take advantage of the state historic tax credit for residential. And they are taking on a huge financial burden to rehab these state-owned structures. So what this bill did was simply spell out that that participants in the resident curatorship program would be allowed to use the residential historic tax credit. So that's great. We want to encourage people working and doing work on their historic homes and structures the right way as much as possible, and this encourages that behavior. It's the carrot
who carried that bill.
This year it was Senator Edwards and Delegate Buckle, who are both Western Maryland legislators. And actually last year Delegate Lutke carried it. So
and the cool thing too is this is, as I think should probably stress this enough, but Preservation Maryland is a nonpartisan organization. We work with anybody who loves historic places and loves revitalizing communities. And the cool thing here is we've just discussed members of the Democratic Party carrying bills. We've just discussed members of the Republican Party carrying bills. So it really is a bipartisan issue, and we have wide support across both aisles of the House and the Senate, and of course in the Hogan administration, which has provided significant support to us for projects in Western Maryland. So I think we probably don't stress that enough, but we are nonpartisan and work with anybody who loves historic places. And as you've heard, we've got people carrying bills on both sides of the aisle. So which is really great, because finding opportunities for bipartisan collaboration. It's wonderful to see that preservation and history is one of those areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've done a heck of a lot of work on historic tax credits. You mentioned the catalytic credit, and if people want to dig deeper into all of this, you're just kind of getting the Cowan cliff notes here. But if you want to dig deeper, we in the comment section here on the Facebook Live, there's links to a lot of different information on these different programs. We have our Sine Die recap report that goes in depth. You can read the bills if you're so inclined, and you're looking for some exciting reading. You can click on all those links and you can read the bills and see how they all come together. You can learn more about the catalytic credit, which is going to potentially provide up to $15 million for revitalization projects, not historic alone, but the rehab and revitalization of formerly government-owned complexes, which is something we've worked closely with Senator Hester on. It's been really something that she's been very passionate about, and I know we're gonna bring the gang back together to continue the study work that she launched a couple years ago. That is sort of what gave birth to a lot of these different programs and investments. So we can't say enough good stuff about Senator Hester, who has a big historic campus in her district in Carroll County that is very important to her, and then also represents what we call
Ellicott City,
one of the crown jewels of historic places.
Right.
Ellicott City, and she's done a tremendous. We're not going to get into it. We don't have enough time today, but she's done a tremendous amount of work on funding for flood mitigation and the tunnels that are going to be built in Ellicott City, which we've talked about and have commented on previously. A lot of that work is going to be made possible because of Senator Hester and Delegate Watson and other members of the General Assembly. Of course, Senator Elfreth has been extremely focused on flood issues. Obviously, her district in Annapolis has considerable issues associated with that. So I'm mentioning all these folks, trying to do my best at name dropping all these different folks that we work with. But I think what I'm also trying to get at is, thanks to the support of our members and donors and supporters and people who tune in to Facebook Lives like this, we have developed a cadre of different supporters across the aisle. Obviously from far Western Maryland, working on this, the residential curatorship bill, to, friends on the Eastern Shore, to friends, in Annapolis. So we have just tremendous support all across the state. And none of what we're describing would be possible without that and without our members pushing for it. So speaking of good things happening, maybe a quick update on the budget before we start talking smart growth.
Yes. And so this year in the budget, we were happy to see that a number of our, priority preservation programs were funded at the same at level funding from last year. So that's the Maryland Historical Trust grants, capital grants, non-capital grants, and the African American Heritage Grant programs. And also that the Maryland Heritage area received the full funding of $6 million again. And so we were really happy again in what, and it started out as a very, very, very tight budget year. I feel like we say that every year, but this year it really was, in the face of COVID recovery and any number of other major priorities. But we were happy to see that funding was there in the budget. And again,
and I was going to say, maybe in that budget piece, I mean, it's sort of a budget and smart growth issue, but it might be a good
open
sort of
space
segue. Program open space, which is maybe remind people how it's funded and why it matters.
Sure. So program open space is the name of a program that supports a whole litany of other programs that promote the conservation of open space in throughout Maryland. And it's really interesting. It's funded through the real estate transfer tax. So anytime a real estate transaction happens, a 0.5% of that transfer tax goes into program open space, into the funding for program open space. And it's great because that ties ostensibly, right, real estate development, housing development, things like that, directly to preserving open space in Maryland. So, as that goes up, the need to preserve open space parks and the heritage area programs are funded through this. The Rural Legacy Area program is another example of an open space program. In the past, because program open space is sort of this big pot of money that, the transfer tax gets put in and then it's allocated out. In the past, the General Assembly has seen fit to borrow from that pot of money, and borrow is sort of being a nice term because I'm not to the tune of something over, I think, $1 billion with a B over the years. And so a couple years back, there was legislation that was passed that provided a schedule for repayment of that money. So really it is borrowing now if you're paying it, I guess. But the problem with that is that that repayment schedule has been deferred significantly. And what has been repaid has not necessarily been the full amount that should have been. The repayment schedule is off. And so going into this year, we were very concerned that, not only perhaps would that repayment schedule, repayment for this year that was scheduled for this year not happen, but, would they raid the program open space funding again? Would they make changes to it, things like that? So Preservation Maryland participates in an alliance of other organizations who are concerned about protecting program open space called the Partners for Open Space. And so the Partners for Open Space were very active in advocating for full funding for program open space and maintaining the repayment schedule. And we had a couple of scares and a couple of recommendations coming from committees or from the agencies that had us a little worried, but I'm happy to report that because of sustained advocacy, we were able to protect that funding to ensure repayment for critical maintenance and things like that.
Which I just want to jump in and say is so important because the parks are being loved to death right now.
Right.
Because of COVID and people kind of getting out. And I think that people have also recognized like, wow, we have these tremendous outdoor resources. I feel better when I go for a hike at Catoctin Mountain Park, or, I feel better when I go for a hike out west. And I don't see us turning back from where we are now. People love the parks. We need more parks. If you, on a nice day, the parks fill to capacity, many of them by 10, 11 a.m. And then that's it. And so we need more, which is part of what Program Open Space does. We need to take care of the parks that we have, which is part of what the funding does. I hope that as a result, maybe one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that people realize how fortunate we are to have these parks and the responsibility we have to be stewards. And I mean, not to like keep going back to Delegate Lukey, but he has really put a spotlight on the parks and is traveling to all of them and tweeting about it. I also should say that the Lieutenant Governor has really taken affinity to the parks and is traveling to all of them. Obviously, just yesterday, there was some excitement about finding Harriet Tubman's father's home. Yeah, and that is part and parcel with obviously the land that it's on is federal land, but then it's connected to the new Harriet Tubman State Park. So we have a lot of champions for the state parks, and I think moving forward, you'll be hearing more from us about state parks just because of the intersection between preservation and history and historic places. And can't say enough good things also about our state park superintendent, Nita Satina, who really gets it and cares deeply about historic places, about the intersection between cultural and natural resources. So we have tremendous leadership in the state parks. We have people across the aisle who care about them, and I think you'll be hearing more from Preservation Maryland in the coming years about state parks because it's just such an important piece of the preservation portfolio.
Yep, and I think delegates Ben Barnes and Mark Chang, who both were champions for us for Program Open Space this year, and of course Chair McIntosh of the Appropriations Committee as well. And I think it's worth noting too that state parks are, that's a state and local parks. Those are free resources for the citizens of Maryland. And I think, when we talk about equity of resources, in having our state invest in this and ensuring that the maintenance of them is kept up. That everyone, that we're expanding our state park system so that everyone is able to have access to the outdoors, which we know is, as Nick, you said, is so important to not only physical health, but mental health. as well. And so, oftentimes these program open spaces, it's thought of as only for rural areas. But I mean, every, the localities all get program open space funding for local parks. So that's Baltimore City, that's in Prince George's County, it's in our urban areas as well. And it's just as important to be investing in the preservation of open space in our urban areas as it is in our rural. And so
maybe just to put a bow on this before we move on to smart growth is, if you have taken your child or your nephew or your niece or your friend to a playground in Maryland, you've probably benefited from program open space. If you've gone to a 100%. State park, you've benefited from it. If you've driven through a well-preserved agricultural area, you're seeing the work of program open space. If you have gone fishing and you have access to public water, it's very likely you're benefiting from program open space. So I think one of the challenges
from a cider distillery in Maryland, you've probably benefited from
exactly. And I think perhaps one of the only failings of the entire program is that it doesn't, like a lot of good meaning and well-meaning programs, it doesn't do enough to sort of toot its own horn. So oftentimes you don't know that you're benefiting from it, even though you are. And I think that moving forward, that's something that we want to emphasize as well, along with the state parks, is that if you're enjoying these resources and you're taking your kid to a playground, or you're at a community park, community parks are paid for, our acquisition can be paid for with this kind of thing. So it really just touches every aspect of Maryland society and
quality of life. It's a big part of the quality of life.
So speaking of quality of life, good next segue. Are we growing smarter, Elly, and what are we doing?
Well, we're trying to grow smarter. So a couple of years ago, Preservation Maryland was able to expand a little bit into with our Smart Growth Maryland program, which has been a really exciting opportunity for us to sort of take the next step in a lot of what our mission is in protecting, the best of Maryland. And one of the most effective ways to do that is through planning and zoning and land use issues. And while that's may not be as exciting as, an archaeological find on the shore or down in Southern Maryland, like we've had in the last couple of months, we've had some really exciting things like that. But ensuring that development is done in a thoughtful and appropriate way to preserve land so that you can have those types of archaeological finds. And again, for quality of life as well, as Maryland grows as a state, and I think, I think that we understand that is inevitable, right? And that we want people to want to live in Maryland. We will grow as a state, but there is a way to do that is not at the expense of our cultural and environmental resources. And so that's at the center of smart growth. It's to grow smarter, and using land use policy to direct growth where it should be going. And so transit's a huge part of a huge tenet of smart growth. And we were very, very honored to be able to work on two separate bills this year that passed that I think have some, pretty phenomenal implications for the future of Maryland. One that we've been working on this specific legislation for 3 years, but other advocates have been working on this project for 25, maybe a little more, but it's the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Program. And so the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Program is a light rail project that would connect the Branch Avenue Metro Station in Prince George's County with the Waldorf and White Plains area in Charles County. And that corridor right there, I think, has the worst commute in the country. And
is that based on data or just your experience?
Both anecdotal and data driven right there.
Yeah, I think anybody from if anybody's watching from Southern Maryland, you're welcome to give us a crying emoji if you'd like.
Right. Right, exactly. And my mother-in-law lives in La Plata, so I only know a small amount of it. It is not my commute. So, so this is something that transit advocates have been working on for a very long time down there. It's exactly, it's where in the comprehensive plan, it's laid out as the appropriate place to do it. There's been a lot of work going into, why that is would be such an essential project for that area to get people off the road, but also, to provide to allow people to move to along that line and then be able to go into work, in the DC metro area. So again, after 3 years of this legislation, I am so thrilled to report that it passed this year, and so it provides funding to move the process forward. So to do the NEPA study, which is one of the essential steps for any large scale transit project, and it
comes at a great time too, with the federal government talking about infrastructure packages. Yes. We actually have the opportunity to implement this. It's not just a study that sits on the shelf. So rapid transit is a big deal.
Yes.
What else is happening with smart growth?
And then and so the other transit bill, which was a priority of the environmental community as well, was the Transit Safety and Investment Act. And so what that does is it basically it mandates funding from the Transportation Trust Fund to do repairs that have been identified by the MTA. And so basically what it is it's mandating the state to actually spend the money to make those much needed repairs to the rapid transit, to the mass transit system. And a lot of those repairs are needed I know I live in Baltimore City, so it is incredibly necessary because people rely on it to go to work and to see family and any number of reasons. And it's leaving it in a state of disrepair is unsafe, but it also, prevents people from being able to make it to their jobs on time. It affects all levels of livelihood. So we were so happy to be involved with that, even in a very, very small way, and are very proud to say that passed after a lot of hard work from the environmental community, the transit equity community, all of it. So and that was Senator Corey McCray. Shout out, he's my senator. So it's really happy to be able to say that he was successful with this legislation.
Successful on that and a series of others. I know Maryland Matters called him out as one of the rock stars of this. Yeah, yes. I think he and Senator Elfreth, two of our friends, called out as rock stars of the General Assembly in getting so much done. I don't know how they introduced as much and then got as much passed. Nothing short of phenomenal. Yes. Then we've also maybe finally tell a little bit about the PACE program, and then we'll wrap up and let people know how they can get more engaged.
Absolutely. So this is the PACE program is a financing program that actually does not cost the state any money, but it's another financing option for people who take on development projects to help pay for certain types of clean energy projects initially. And so it's a clean energy loan program. I won't get into the details for brevity's sake and for
people are welcome to look it up. And actually, you can find out about PACE on if you search PACE on our website at prismd.org.
Absolutely.
You can learn all about
it. So this is the second year running. And again, I should mention a lot of these bills you've seen multiple times, because a lot of times it takes, about 3 years for people to for legislators to wrap their heads around it and to get legislation through. But also last year, let's remember, session ended, our very short 90-day session ended even earlier because of COVID. So this was one of the bills that I think was a victim of that shortened period. It probably would have passed last year. But what this does is it just expands eligible projects for that PACE type of financing to include resiliency projects. And Nick, you spoke a lot about that earlier in our discussion here. But just, preparing for the effects of climate change and sea level rise and all of that before it happens. There's a lot of programs about how to, repair your structure after the flood happens. This allows you to sort of get set and prepared for it, but with flood proofing and projects like that. But
and
also,
I should say, we try and stay pretty humble here, but yes. We really were. I mean, I'm pleased to say that Preservation Maryland was the group that kind of went out and did the research to identify the fact that PACE could be used in this way, and connected the dots for legislators and made the case for using PACE for resilience. And so that is something that Preservation Maryland spearheaded. We actually, I remember Elly and I doing the research, kind of looked at how out in the far west they use this for seismic retrofits, so issues with earthquakes. And so we kind of connected the dots and said, well, why couldn't you use it for flooding and resilience? And so others took the ball and ran with it. Yes. And there's been a lot of other work. We can't take all the credit for it, but I am pleased to say that the preservation group was the one who kind of connected the dots on this and made the case for it. And we have great friends in the PACE program. And obviously, Senator Hester has been very supportive of this program, and as well as others. But this is an area where I think we're pleased to have a little bit of the credit associated with making this happen.
And for preservation projects too, this allows for the remediation, for environmental remediation projects as well. And I think anyone who's taken on any type of historic preservation project knows that the cost associated with lead paint abatement, asbestos abatement, things like that, those environmental remediation projects can end up costing a significant amount. So to be able to finance that aspect of a development with this this PACE financing hopefully will help their financials work out a little bit better when they're putting that all together.
Obviously, as you can tell from this report, took us 48 minutes to get through all of this. We basically
and we didn't even touch everything.
Surface. We could do another 48 and talk about all the other things that we've worked on, and all the other projects out there. But obviously, it was an exceptionally busy session. It was a positive session. Would not have been possible without our supporters.
No.
And so I want to let people know about how they can get a little bit more engaged. I think first and foremost, we have a link in the comments here. Please go and thank your legislator for their help in this. That's something that you can do. You can also, if you are so inclined and you are impressed by this work, we really do need the support of our members and donors to support our advocacy work. It's one of the more challenging things to raise funds for.
Yeah.
This year, the return on investment for this, in the historic tax credit world alone, between that and the new catalytic credit, we're talking about an additional $19 million for historic preservation and revitalization projects. So your return on investment would be high if you jumped on and made a $50 gift or maybe a $90 gift in honor of our 90th anniversary, however you want to do it. And we also would encourage you to go onto our website, go to the bottom of the website, sign up if you haven't already to get our emails, because that's a way in which we engage with our members and let them know about opportunities to take action, to contact the legislator, to thank a legislator. So thank people, make a gift, stay engaged, share this live video. That actually would help a lot, get the word out. And stay tuned, because the great thing about legislative advocacy is it never
Always next
ends.
year.
There's always next year. It's just like rooting for the Orioles. There's
You
always
took my
next
joke.
year.
You took my joke.
And I steal jokes. We really appreciate everyone's support. And obviously our advocacy is in good hands thanks to Elly and Ruby Webube, who is
Our advocacy associate.
Who has worked really closely with Elly on all of this, and our entire team for that matter. From time to time, I even make an appearance.
Yep.
It's a team effort, and we're thrilled to have the support. And also have to say that this year, Cross Street Partners has been a big supporter of our advocacy work. Would not have been able to do it without them. We have a lobbyist team at Compass Government Partners that have been really supportive of our work. So it's from legislators to donors to supporters, to even yes, lobbyists. We are really very gotta have it. We're really very fortunate and thrilled to have been able to bring you this little update, and hope to talk with everyone very soon.
Next year in Annapolis. So
there's always next year.
There's always next year. Thank you.
Thank you.